You know, when I was younger, we had the pornography. It was in magazines. And it was kind of tough for a kid to get a hold of, unless you went in this old man's attic or something, or your cousin gave it to her or whatever. And I remember seeing that stuff. And to this day, I wish I never would have. I go on to think, whenever we view that stuff which we were never meant to view, it skews our minds and makes us, it keeps us from loving as fully as we possibly could, because it reduces our focus on the person and puts the focus on their parts. I see this especially among students as a chaplain, how they suffer with it as an addiction, and how often it was kind of brushed off, or maybe their parents kind of said, well, you know, everybody does it, and never really talked to them about it and how wrong it is and how we have to watch out for the dangers of this. Because one day you might have a girlfriend and one day you might be married, and the last thing you want to do is look at her as the sum of her parts, and vice versa. And yet the evil one would say, it's free speech. It's okay. We should be allowed to do this. They'll put an age limit on it, and no one who shouldn't see it will ever be able to get a hold of it. And now certainly with the internet, it's easier than ever before. The evil one. That's whose voice we hear. With respect to in vitro fertilization and other fertilization techniques, you want to be parents. And it's not fair that God has kept you from that. You have a right to be a parent. You have a right to be able to conceive, and He has taken that from you, so you take it into your own hands. You do whatever you have to do. Any means possible. And so maybe you will abort some along the way, but in the end, the good kind of justifies the means. After all, you are loving parents. You do want to get pregnant, right? We have an attitude of live and let live. This is not your issue. Just leave it alone. Let them deal with it. It doesn't affect you. Let them live their life, and you live your life. It's none of your business. And how much less stress you'll have. You won't be in confrontation with your friends or neighbors. Just kind of smooth it over and do whatever you want. And finally, with respect to the faith, why are you giving your children religion this early? Why are you bringing them to church? Wait till they're teenagers or in their 20s, and then they can choose their own religion, instead of you forcing this faith down their throat. After all, you want to have adults that are open-minded. You want to have children that can look for themselves and determine things for themselves, right? Well, how can they determine something if we give them no foundation? And yet the evil one would have us believe that we are hindering our children, that we're putting them in a bubble, that we're not letting them explore, we're not letting them make squares when we ask for triangles. The temptation to make bread out of stones is just that. It's wanting what is best for us in every situation, regardless of the natural law or not. It's about me. And when I believe those things, I make myself into a god. And I am not only the god, but I am the worshiper as well. The second temptation, all the kingdoms of the world will be yours if you kneel down and worship me. And Jesus says, worship the Lord your God alone. The problem is, many of us have our concept of God. There was an author who once said, in the beginning God created us in His image and likeness, and we've been returning the favor ever since. Again, when I was at St. Benedict's, I was up in the woods, and the secretary called me and said that there was a sickness, that someone had called about needing a priest. And I said to her, well, call a priest. You know, I'm out here in the woods. Call a priest, get him anointed. Well, it's not that kind of sickness. And so I called the people, and the woman spoke to me about espíritu malo, a bad spirit. And so I had them come in. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but it was late. It was about 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. I had just got back. And they came in and they didn't speak any English. And so I'm trying to garner from this woman the things that are happening. But I said to her, you don't mind if I videotape this, do you? Because I had had so many experiences by that time that I wanted to videotape my interactions. The boy was about 16 years old, and he didn't speak much English at all. And so they came in, and they began talking with me. Now, just about 2 months ago, or before that, I had put a chapel in the rectory. I could not go into the main church to pray because I'd look up and I'd say, oh man, that spider web there is really bothering me. Or, there's a crack in the wall there and I'm going to have to fix that. And I just get so distracted. So I put the Blessed Sacrament in the house and I had a chapel there, and that's where I made my holy hour. It was right above my office. And I'm talking to the two of them, and they're talking at the same time, which was pretty standard at that point, telling me all the things that are going on in Spanish. And all of a sudden, the boy drops his head. And the moment that happened, the woman got on her knees and began to pray. And as she was praying, he raised his head, and then he spoke to me in English. And he said, "What did you do?" Now I'm speaking to him and saying, "Can I help you? I know something's wrong. Can I help you? What can I do for you?" And he says to me, "He's here, isn't he? He's here. You brought him in the house, and he's here." And then he called me something bad that I'm not going to say right now. And then just as suddenly, he dropped his head. And then when he raised it again, he continued his story as though there was no pause. He knew that the Blessed Sacrament was upstairs. He knew it. He sensed it. And if evil believes in the power of that consecrated host, what does that say about us? When he tempts Jesus and says, "If you kneel down and worship me," many times we have recreated God in our image so that we might live the way we choose to live. And I try to be ecumenical as I can, which means the other Christian churches, I try to work with them. But there are some Christian churches that allow things that in Scripture are abominations. When you have openly gay bishops serving communities and ministers who are marrying each other, let alone having same-sex unions within their congregations, they cannot be Bible churches unless they have a different Bible, or unless they're avoiding all those points in Scripture where it condemns that behavior. It goes without saying about contraception. For them, that's a non-issue. And so I think to myself, we will often be told, and this is the voice of the evil one, you worship the same God. One church is as good as another. Do you realize that some churches you go to, that it's not even a sin if you miss church on Sunday? Now, don't all of you run out at once. But it's true. And so we shop around for the easiest possible. And if I'm in a state of life that I have put myself outside of communion with the Catholic Church, then one of these is a nice alternative. Because after all, there is a coffee shop in the narthex. After all, the music is great. It's what all the kids are listening to. That's what we go in for. After all, the pastor's very entertaining. The way he'll do a puppet show, or he'll get up and dance, or do whatever else. And they have the sign out front. Baptisms every Sunday, no questions asked. Some of them even have a sign that says, "We have Catholic sacraments." They want us. But let me tell you, the Jesus they speak of, I don't know him. I really don't. Do you ever wonder why in the Gospels Jesus never preaches on abortion? You ever wonder why he never preaches on contraception? Why he never preaches on same-sex unions? Or even homosexuality, for that point? because nobody had the guts to ask his opinion. They asked him about everything else. Can you imagine, in an honor-shame society, which means once you're shamed, you have to leave the village. Can you imagine someone coming up to Jesus and saying, well, what do you think about abortion? And if he were not struck dead, everybody probably would have looked at him like, are you kidding me? What did you just ask? I can't believe you asked that in public. I mean, you're asking someone who claims to be a son of God, the one that creates, the one that says, lest you touch a hair on the head of one of these little ones, it would be better that a millstone were hung about your neck and you thrown into the sea. That's the one you're asking about abortion? No, these were non-issues for Jesus. They were no-brainers. It's like he might not have even entertained the question, because he would think, this is obvious. Look at natural law. It's obvious, the answer. And so, those who kneel down and worship, what do we worship? We worship the rich and famous. We worship the beautiful. We worship those who can make us rich and famous. We worship reality television and sitcoms and movie stars. How do we know this? Because they create the trends and we buy them. We do. It's interesting that in a Catholic school, I see uniforms all the time, but if you give them a dress down today, they dress all the same anyway, with the latest trend. They're all wearing the latest trend. And so what are we doing? So this is who we worship. And it is not God. Because the God that created us, demands sacrifice. And sacrifice is not the God of the belly, the stomach.